I grew up in Northern Virginia. I mean, my mother brought up 5 kids. My mom and dad were divorced and remarried to each other 4 times. I'm not kidding you. That's why I became a lawyer. And my father actually spent 2 tours of the state prison system, but I love politics. And for my 4 years of high school, I was a page in the U.S. Senate. In my summers in college, I worked in the White House for Nixon. I went to Amherst, which is a small college in Massachusetts, and David Eisenhower, President's son-in-law, was a classmate. When I got out, I came back to Fairfax. I went to UVA for law school after the Army, and was active in politics there and ran for the county board when I was 29 years old back in 1979. And nobody thought I could win. In fact, I said if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have run. But I ended up winning and did 3 terms as the Mason District Supervisor, then 3 years as county chair, and then I ran for Congress. And so 15 years on the county board total. But during some very interesting years where development was the key issue, and my race for chairman, as you know, in 1991 was the classic race with Audrey Moore, the no-growth incumbent, versus me as the pro-business candidate. And I like to think that helped redefine the landscape a little bit for the county. There had been a no-growth board before that. Remember, Fairfax was growing rapidly. It was a bedroom community. People who lived here basically commuted to Washington, and they moved out here because it was the country. They didn't want to live in the city. They were making a statement living out here. It reflected their values, and they didn't want the city to follow them out here. But and so they resisted attempts at growth. And in the 1971 board that came in had a 5-member clique that was basically put sewer moratoriums, zoning moratoriums, and other things in check to try to slow growth. Between the courts and the legislature, most of this stuff got overturned. But they were still, I think, reflective of where public opinion was. And then they took I-66 inside the Beltway. They took it off the master plan at the Council of Governments, basically eliminated 66 going through to D.C. And it became an issue for people as they moved to Vienna and Centerville and Reston and other places. It became an issue. And so when Jack Harity, the lone Republican on the board elected in '71, ran for chairman against Jean Packard, it was an issue, and he beat her in basically a huge upset at the time, and brought in a pro-growth board. It was a Democratic majority, but these issues were not partisan issues. This was growth, no growth. It cut across a lot of lines. And they put 66 on the master plan. The Ford administration, with Bill Coleman as Secretary of Transportation, funded that it could only be 4 lanes, but they got it through, and they changed a lot of the growth plans around and signaled put money into economic development. And then we went on a good spree there for the next 12 years or the next 8 years. And then Audrey Moore came, and people were tired of growth again, and they unelected Jack Harity in 1987, where there were. Well, you look around the region at successful jurisdictions and unsuccessful jurisdictions, and you look around the world at successful jurisdictions, and it really comes down to governance at the end of the day. The one thing I learned in Fairfax is if you don't have a tax base, you can't do all these other nice things. You can't cut taxes. You can't have affordable housing. You can't take care of your poor people. You can't have before-school daycare. You want these things, you got to have a tax base. And if you're continually, in the face and poking your finger in the chest of your business community, they go somewhere else in this day and age. So that's a really important, valuable lesson I learned. And so that money was symbolically important, and we put more heft behind it afterwards, and we changed some regulations. Well, I think we did a lot of things. Look, the county had grown so fast and so quickly that you get a little sloppy. And you don't look underneath about where you got jobs you don't need. You got people that are performing tasks don't need to be performed, filling out forms that don't need to be printed, because the money's coming in so fast you don't need to think about it. This gave us a chance to take a look at how we were actually doing things in business processes, and come back and kind of streamline government a little bit. And in so doing, we had to make some tough decisions. I went to Sid Dewberry and to Patil Hazel and Earl Williams and some of the smartest people I could find in the county, and said, I'm in over my head. I need help. Can you give us some time and figure out what we need to do? And they took a look at the budget, came back with a series of recommendations. One of the recommendations that struck everybody as odd is we were renting 2 buildings, the Harity and the Panino building out in Fairfax, and we had a 30-year lease, and they said, buy them. I said, well, we can't even pay the bills where we are. How are we buying these? He said, buy them. He says, you're going to end up saving $3 million a year over the long term. So we bought them. And it wasn't a hard sell to the board, frankly, when you get these guys, people of that stature, behind it. We got unanimous board votes. I got unanimous board votes on my budget. I mean, people forget we were worried about making payroll at the end of the month. And when I sat down with the county employees right after being sworn in, they said, are we going to get a COLA? I said, you're not getting a COLA. You're not getting step. We're just trying to keep everybody's job. And the way we get out of this is we build a tax base. And slowly but surely, we did it. It wasn't just me and it wasn't just the board. We created an environment, but you've got to have the confidence of business leaders, and people are going to invest their own money and take the risks out there to make this thing work. I did, but I had a hot potato. When I was first sworn in, they had a new subcommittee that was created. It used to be a full committee. The Republicans had folded it and made it a subcommittee called the District of Columbia Subcommittee. So there was no incumbent, and nobody really wanted the job. And Newt Gingrich said, you know, Tom, committee won't do anything, but you get your mug on TV. And I said, I'd love to be chairman of the DC committee. I was president of the Council of Governments when I was on the county board. And like 2 weeks later, the city lost its bond rating and was going straight down. And they said, my God, we've given this to a freshman. Does he know what he's doing? And I think time will tell whether I did or not, but I was able to, at least I was scared because I shared the hometown paper with Eleanor Holmes Norton, the DC delegate. Here you had a white suburban congressman that was now going to be basically in charge of the city. And I did what anybody does in a position like that, is I went to the best advice I could get on what you do. And with Alice Rivlin, who was President Clinton's OMB, we sat across the table. We included DC leadership in the conversations, and eventually I introduced a control board bill, and 9 days later was signed into law by President Clinton. I was sitting as chairman of that DC committee, was able to get the Lorton prison closed. Gotten land donated to Fairfax, and the part I couldn't get given to Fairfax, I got basically valued at almost nothing. And then they bought it from GSA for a song. So the county basically got 3,000 acres for a song that they could use. The western state guys really didn't like that because their states are full of federally owned land. They'd love to give back to their states. I remember walking into a conference. I wasn't on the conference, Moran was. And it was Ted Stevens, who was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, walked in. He said, guys, he said, you guys do your work. He said, but he said, I like everything in this bill. It was an Interior Appropriations bill. He said, but he said, this Lorton thing, he said, I don't like that. I don't want anybody to do anything with that till they check with me. I said, oh my God. So I was sitting there trying to follow this, and I followed him outside and walked down the hall, and Stevens was a gruff guy, and I said, Senator Stevens? He said, yes. I said, my name's Tom Davis. I'm a congressman from Virginia. I know who you are. I said, Senator Stevens, I said, I'm a first-term Republican. This Lorton thing is really important to me. He said, well, you know, I got a lot of land in my state, too. I'd like to give to Alaska, and I can't do that. I said, well, I just went. I said, Clarence Davis was my grandfather. He said, he was. He said, yeah. He said, Clarence Davis was from Nebraska. You're from Virginia. I said, well, when he came and was solicitor at the Interior Department, our family moved here back. He said, Clarence Davis gave me my first job. I said, this Lorton thing's really important. He said, I'll take care of it. So sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
It's all about relationships.
It really is about relationships. And Jim was a champ because on all of these issues, had to have somebody running interference on the other side of the aisle. It takes both sides to get things, anything major accomplished. We did a land swap down at Mason's Neck that preserved that area for eternity that was always under the threat of development. We worked that. The problem was in the zoning and the redistricting that followed, I ended up having all that territory, even though Jim had helped me. That was good. The people that had been there remembered me, but the new people moving in voted Democratic. So it was one of these things where no good deed goes unpunished. But I think it was a great relationship. And Frank Wolf, our other member too, we just put aside the partisanship, and with that was able to get money for the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, get money for the Beltway, get money for rail out to Dulles, and we put partisanship and credit aside on these things. It doesn't always work that way in delegations, but it did here. So I took the Government Reform and Oversight Committee because it had jurisdiction over DC. It had jurisdiction over federal employees and all the comp issues that go there, and government contracting. I mean, that's the trifecta for somebody from Northern Virginia in those days. So we were involved in all aspects of everything that happened. some of my predecessors in Congress, Joel Broyhill, Stan Paris, had really been harsh on the district. I took a different view. I took the view that the District of Columbia and Fairfax's destinies were ultimately intertwined. And Jerry, you helped me open that up. You talked at one point how we'd advertise how close to all these world capitals we were, but we wouldn't mention D.C. because it was so bad. But that if the city got better, it would help the region. This was not a zero-sum game. It was so bad. But that if the city got better, it would help the region. This was not a zero-sum game. One of the issues that came up was baseball, because we wanted baseball in Northern Virginia. We were close to getting it. I'd flown out to Chicago in 1994 to appear before Major League Baseball on a group here. D.C. wanted baseball, and at one point we were at loggerheads. And Ellen Holmes Norton and I called a meeting of the jurisdictions, and we said, look, we're going to support baseball for the region. We'll let Major League Baseball decide where it wants to go. But this going to Tampa is ridiculous. We want to have it come here. And so we called that. And as you know, baseball wanted to come to Northern Virginia. But Virginia couldn't put the deal together, and D.C. could. Businesses come in and they figure this is a fatted cow, we're going to kill it and pluck it and milk it, and the cow would go somewhere else. So there are some lessons learned here. And number one is you've got to be good to your business community, because this is a competitive world. And business can vote with their feet and go somewhere else. And if you don't have a tax base, you can't do anything else you want to do. Now, for Fairfax, you'd ask, what does this mean for Fairfax? We got to keep our eye on the ball. This is not automatic because a business is here today that they're here when their lease is up 5 years or 10 years later. We saw Mobil Oil get up and leave. It wasn't anything I think Fairfax did, but nothing is automatic in this business over a period of time. And so we are constantly reinventing ourselves, going to our entrepreneurs and giving them the tools they need. The county doesn't create jobs. It's the people who take risks. It's the Inova hospital systems who take the risk and bring in some high-powered heart surgeons to create something here, or some DNA testing. It's George Mason University with the brain powers that drive this stuff. And then, picking up the credit that people can get, assets. And investments that they couldn't get other places. And it's a governmental structure where people feel if they come here, they're going to be welcome. It's going to be a predictable climate. But you're constantly working on these things, because there's always a set of people out there that feel business isn't paying enough, that they're getting shortcuts. They're not treated like everybody else. And I mean, sometimes they aren't. But these are hard conversations to have. But be mindful of the fact that in this day and age, picking up and going to Loudoun or going to D.C. or going to Florida is very easy for companies to do, and these are the people that pay the bills day to day for the county. Yeah, well, so we saw the county population becoming, more diverse. And the question is, are these people, what role are they going to have in the county? Are they going to have a role in the political leadership, in the business leadership, in the education leadership? Nothing's automatic. I remember at one point we had a softball field reserved by a corporation had reserved the softball field. They go there, and you had a group of people from El Salvador were playing soccer there, and they wouldn't move. And a fight broke out. And I said to myself, whoa, that's fine. I found out the Salvadorians had their own soccer league, and I found the head of the soccer league was a cook in some restaurant. And I went out some late into the night, and we put him on the athletic council and started giving him fields. The same goes for appointments to boards and commissions. I put the first Hispanic on a school board. We put the first Asian on a school board. But more importantly, within the business community, we looked at minority businesses. You can't do set-asides in Virginia. And I'm not a fan of set-asides, but I am a fan of outreach, and I am a fan of empowerment. And I am a fan of getting people out there to compete and know that, if they can, the more competitors we have for a job, the better price we're going to get for our taxpayers. And so we put this small minority business coalition together. They looked at it. They gave it a scrub perspectives I never would have seen. And we put some of these recommendations in. We have a thriving minority business community here. We got, as you know, just a talented minority population here who came here to this country because of the freedom and the innovation it offers, and they have really helped make the county what it is today. Well, I think, first of all, we need to stay in tune with the needs of the business community because we are creating the talent that our business community needs. It's not the sole reason the university exists. We're still going to have people taking political science and French and all that, but it's important for us to stay tuned to the business community because we are the pipeline for employment. George Mason graduates, as we speak today, in 2016, make more their first year out of college than any other school in the state. And part of that is because we are a pipeline. We have relevant majors for people that can be picked up by our local companies. We have the first Bachelor of Cyber offered in the nation. So we're trying to stay ahead on that, but we only do that with a good, if you will, dialogue with our businesses in terms of what do you need and make sure that we're able to supply that. We are also, we're not an elite school. We're not an easy school, but we don't cater to just the elite. We cater to a lot of people. This is first generation people. We give them a chance and the education opportunity. They're going to succeed on their own, and our graduates are doing that every day. We've had 2 Nobel Prize winners come out of the university, and hopefully more to come in the future. So we are kind of the intellectual linchpin for this region in terms of our technology growth and some of the other areas, and we want to continue to do that. If you look at successful tech centers around the country, they all have academic bases. And in the past, it was ARPA, it was the Pentagon, National Science Foundation, but I think George Mason has added a key component to that with our brainpower. Well, it really comes down to the issues we've always had: transportation and education. You need to continue to have an education system that feeds talent and innovation, and you need a transportation system that can get people around. These are continuing challenges. We've never really caught up on the transportation deficit that was created in the 60s, but I think those are just very, very key components. And a solid business community and atmosphere to do business, because ultimately that's what attracts the tax base, provides employment opportunities, feeds the charities, and the things that a county needs to survive. So a key tax base, you can do these other things. Without a tax base, you can't.